No, it's really great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to hear your story.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan, for having me.
Absolutely. I've already given you an intro, but why don't you introduce yourself again and tell people who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Mollie Lewis, and my current title is president of New Riff Distilling. New Riff Distilling is actually my family business. We're located here in northern Kentucky in a pretty small town called Newport. It runs right along the river of Cincinnati. So we have Ohio to the north, and we consider ourselves the top of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, or the beginning of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail here in Newport.
I love Newport. It's such a fun town. And if people have listened to my first episode about Northern Kentucky, um, we talked about Newport being, the kind of the Las Vegas of its day. So how exciting! You're right in there with the prohibition stuff and
Yeah,
everything.
there's a lot of storied history here in Newport. It has a pretty checkered but interesting past, and we're pretty proud to be a part of that too.
So let's get into it. At Lush Life, we like to go back and then go forward. So, New Riff, tell me, the beginnings. I know I believe your dad started it, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about how he even thought to create a bourbon company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Kentucky. So did my father, actually. His father, my grandfather, came to Kentucky from New York after immigrating from Northern Europe. And
All
my
right,
father was
I'm
in the
already going
government.
to interrupt you.
Oh, okay.
Why? Is there a reason why he decided to leave New York and come to Kentucky?
No, he was an engineer and he was a businessman as well. He was trying to find his way. He was a young man. And I believe the story is that a friend told him that things would be easier in the South and that he would have more opportunity to do all the things and that he wanted to do. And there was less opportunity in crowded New York. He was in Rochester. And
Okay.
so he took a leap of faith. I believe he and some friends moved down to Kentucky, and then he met my grandmother and they planted roots, and so be it. But I never remember him having a Kentucky accent, and therefore I don't think a lot of us in the family had this strong Kentucky accent, but we're certainly Kentuckians at this point.
Of course. All right. Sorry. Go on with your dad.
No, thank you. So the story is that's fun. So my grandfather started a consolidated store. They were selling a lot of army surplus and things. And there was a small liquor section in the store. His brother, my father's uncle, was running that store. And, the family story is that he was a gambler and that he was drinking all the profits. And so my grandfather kicked him out and asked my father, who was in early 20s, he had just finished college, to help him run the store. And it wasn't really what my father wanted to do, but he said, sure, I'll help you out, family obligations. And then he found out that he really had a knack for it, and was really good at putting the store together and was really interested in the product. And so he never went back. He was studying to be a teacher, and he was sort of a teacher by osmosis all of his life, teaching me and teaching so many people that have worked with and for him. But he never went back formally to the classroom and just continued to build stores and create a beverage alcohol um, chain here in Kentucky. And then the last one that he built, which is the largest one, is a store called the Party Source. And the Party Source, folks in the area know it. It's actually still to date the largest beverage alcohol store, the largest independent beverage alcohol store in the United States, still to date, which is really neat. So he built the store in the early 90s. It's right on the border with Ohio. Ohio has state laws that control the pricing of spirits and whatnot. And so it was a success. Folks would travel over the border and shop. And, he had his finger on the pulse of what was happening in Kentucky and the bourbon scene. He has amazing stories about in the 90s being offered full barrels of, you name it, Pappy X, 15-year-old this, and, Four Roses that, and all the Buffalo Trace items that are special. And he just saw the boom starting to happen. He remembers when Blanton's was on the shelf and you had to dust it off. Nobody
Yeah.
wanted to buy it. And so he fell in love with bourbon, and fell in love with the fact that it was America's native spirit, America's only native spirit, and that really the good stuff comes from Kentucky.
Yeah.
He fell in love with bourbon and then kind of took a look around here in northern Kentucky and realized that since Prohibition, there really hadn't been anything of significance in the distilling world here in northern Kentucky. There were a couple small operations, pot still operations, a barrel a week kind of thing, but nothing really of significance putting northern Kentucky on the map as far as being a bourbon destination in the state of Kentucky. And so his second chapter, if you will, was to try to change that.
All right,
And so,
before we get to the second chapter, let's go back to the first chapter for a
sure.
second. I, as a Pennsylvanian, have heard of the party source. It is
Okay.
huge. It is huge. Yes, it must have been really interesting for him in the 90s, being in Kentucky, because that was, of course, the time when vodka was king. And when you
Absolutely.
say that, he could have all these barrels, I mean, they just probably didn't know what to do with them,
They were
really.
probably giving them away to an extent. I mean, it was an interesting time. And as we've been told, bourbon is really a cyclical market item. And so certainly in the 80s, particularly in early 90s, there was a real slump,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, some of the heritage distilleries were still making some production, but it was a hard item to sell. Didn't have certainly anything near the cachet that it started to accumulate as it got more recent times.
Yeah, and I guess being a Kentuckian, he was kind of uh, had bourbon in his veins. Was this something that he drank at home? I mean, was it not?
It was around, it was something that he was aware of and he
Uh,
drank socially and he learned about. I don't remember him drinking a lot of bourbon at home growing up. I remember he smoked a pipe and, would drink cocktails and things. I don't remember bourbon being particularly the most meaningful thing that he drank until I was in high school and a little bit later.
uh,
And that I remember the change. I remember the interest growing.
uh,
And I remember there was an interest in rye whiskey as well. The stories are back in the early 90s, there were one, two, maybe three selections on the shelf. Now in the party source, there's a whole wall of rye. But I remember when he talked about rye being a growing category too. So he was in it every day. He saw what was coming in the door. He saw that there was going to be a boom. He envisioned this trajectory that ended up really happening.
and you, by osmosis, must have just been not even realizing, but soaking it all in,
Yeah,
as
it was
a
a really
young
exciting time. I
adult.
learned a lot about a lot of different spirits. I was allowed to drink wine at the table when I was 18. And, we were a family that really embraced drinking being part of the table. I like to think we were a little Italian or European in that regard. But yeah, it was a part of life. It was a part of our family life in a way that maybe it wasn't for a lot of Americans at the time growing up.
Yeah, and through my research, I know that you were an artist. And although you were drinking at the table, that you then got to drink in other places, in other countries. Tell me about how you got, before we get to the second chapter, but your first chapter before you got involved with New Riff.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, I'm the firstborn.
Okay.
And there was always a lot of pressure that at some point I would come into the family business, right? There was an expectation that just sort of like lived in the ethos. But I was really encouraged to figure out what my passion was and what I was good at. And so I gravitated to the arts at a young age. Painting, visual arts was really my thing. I had the privilege of going to a magnet art high school, which was unusual, especially in Kentucky, that kind of thing was even offered, but it really was. I went to a pretty interesting magnet high school where we had some fascinating teachers who really encouraged personal development. And so I was also encouraged to go to art school. I felt like that was really my calling. We looked at a number of different schools. I was awarded a couple of scholarships I'm proud to share. And I ended up going to Parsons School of Design in New York. And Parsons is known for fashion in
Right.
all transparency, but they actually have a very interesting art program. And one of the strengths of Parsons is that it's located in New York City. So you're soaking up all the culture and the arts and the multiculturalism just by being in that city. So that's where I went, and I'm so glad that I did.
And then I know that you took that passion for wine and ended up in Italy. Was that
Yeah,
right
yeah,
after
I
Parsons?
did, absolutely. Well, I dabbled in the arts. I did a 5-year degree program at Parsons, loved living in New York, but it's hard to make money in the arts, right? And so I
Yes.
remember in my early 20s having a conversation with my father. I call him Ken, at work. Um, but I remember talking with him and he was like, well, you drink enough wine. Why don't you learn something about it? And I think the impetus was to always to have me learn something about wine and then come back to the family business, which was still retail at the time.
It makes me
And
laugh. It sounds so much like my dad too. But
is that right?
yeah.
So I got a job in the tasting room in at Behringer, which anyone who knows Behringer on this call don't cringe. I
Right.
poured some white Zinfandel when I was 24 years old, but it was really a great learning experience to learn about wine, to see the kinds of questions people were asking. I mean, um, it was a great starting point. It was a great experience, and I'm fortunate to have had that opportunity. And then I did. I worked in a number of different wine positions through distribution. I worked in restaurants, um, and then had the opportunity to go to Italy in 2007, which was very exciting. I will say I followed a guy to Italy who I am no longer with, but ended up being the best thing that I ever did for myself. And I ended up staying there for 5 years.
Yeah, anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I have a love affair with Italy as well. And, there's so much to learn there when you think that really so many of the great bartenders here in London are Italian.
Yeah.
Just really the majority. It's like kind of a joke if there isn't an Italian behind the bar here. And so many things that they bring with them, including hospitality. What do you feel that I know you're no longer in wine, but I'm sure you still love it and love Italy. But what do you feel that you brought back with you from Italy, even though you're not in wine and
Absolutely. No, that's a great
you're
question.
in
I don't know if I've
spirits?
ever been asked that question so directly, and I love it. I agree with you. I think there's such just a wonderful culture around food and beverage coming out of Italy. It's in people's veins, just sitting at the table, wine or even a spirit cocktail being a part of the table. And that's how I think too.
Mhm.
So it was a really exciting time. I absorbed a lot. I learned a lot about authenticity and a sense of place, terroir. And I really was excited to come back to Kentucky and we'll get back to it, I think, about how we decided to move forward with New Riff. But there were a lot of parallels. We're talking about America's native spirit. We're talking about bourbon. And although you can make bourbon in any state in the entire 50 states, there's a theory that all the best stuff, all the best bourbon comes from Kentucky. I certainly think so.
Mhm.
And so the idea of being in a family business representing a sense of place was a great parallel to what I was learning and what I was doing in Italy. And I do think that I brought some of my hospitality that I learned over in Italy back to what we do here at New Riff. I don't want to skip too far ahead, but we decided early on that we were going to be champions in in our single barrel program.
Wait,
And so,
before we do get to that, let's go to the
okay,
second chapter and let's talk about New Riff and why your dad from the party source decided to, you know, bite off a huge, you know, this is a huge thing that he did, to create a distillery.
it was a
It had
huge
to be a
thing. He
huge
wasn't,
passion.
yeah, and he wasn't young. I mean, I'll give you that. He had his career in retail. He'd been in as a retailer for over 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And I will be completely transparent. The Party Source at this point was a debt-free business. I mean, a lot of folks in his shoes might have just moved to Tahiti,
Yeah.
and sometimes he probably wishes, why didn't I do that? But he had a real passion. He's an entrepreneur.
Right.
He doesn't sit still. He doesn't like it when things get too comfortable. He has that crazy. I'm not necessarily like that, but he likes to push the limit and the envelope and the edge. And so he got it into his head that he wanted to create a real bourbon destination here in Northern Kentucky, and put Northern Kentucky on the map as being one of the meccas, one of the focal points in Kentucky for bourbon and bourbon tourism. And
Mhm.
so, we say that New Riff was created in 2009, 2010 around the dinner table. A little bit of it had to do with Ken, him visiting me in Italy and experiencing some of the family wineries that we spent time in. I think that definitely kind of fueled the interest. And he started really putting the layers into practice and making it happen. What I always love to point out is that the party source, which we actually share a parking lot with, believe it or not, but he, in 2014, one of the best days and most memorable days of my life was when he told the employees at the party source, and there are about 100 employees in that store, 100 different families, and when he sold the store to the employees. So I love to point that out because I do feel that kind of gives an image of the value system and the ethos that New Riff was built on. But he could have made so much more money selling to a Total Wine and More or one of these larger chains, or who knows who might have been interested. But he wanted to take care of his people and he wanted to take care of his employees, and he made them all owners of the store. It's being an ESOP is a profit sharing opportunity for the employees of the store. So to this date, you walk into that store, which is still the largest independent retail store in the country, and it's employee owned, which is,
That's amazing. It is amazing.
it is. I
It's
love
such
that.
a generosity of spirit.
It's a generosity of spirit. It's taking care of people.
Uh-huh.
Of course, he wants to live well. Of course, he wants to make money. I mean, who doesn't? But he also believes in sharing. And I think that's a really important value system that we have now adapted or always had to as the second generation of leadership here at New Riff. But I don't want to get too far ahead from that. So that enabled us financially to build New Riff from the ground up. So we got the money.
Yeah.
Party Source was being run by the employees, and we started to build this building that I'm currently in right now from the ground up. And we finished construction in 2014 and had our first distillation in May of 2014. So it was a pretty exciting time.
I'm sure it was. Now, okay, what had you planned? Did you have then the mash bill? Did you have a bottle design? Did you have the name? Tell me through these kind of marketing things and
Yeah,
how you got them.
none of us had done this before.
Uh-huh.
Ken certainly hadn't. I certainly hadn't. And then we had an awesome team who mostly are still here. We had an 8-member team. Hannah Lowen, who's our current CEO, and Brian Sprance, who's our master distiller. We're all already on board, already part of the team. Um, you know, the naming of the distillery, it's really hard to do. It's like naming a child. There's a lot of responsibility there, right? We had a lot of other names. We kept thinking about, do we call it North of the South, or do we talk about Kentucky? And, none of that really resonated with us because we felt that we weren't being authentic. We don't have grandpa's recipe under the bed. We don't have hundreds of years of distillation culture in our family, or the original DSP, here in the States. So we felt that those names were a little inauthentic. But we kept coming back to being a new Riff on Ken's life.
Right.
Here he was, older than midlife, making a complete career change, starting a whole new business, very capital intensive. And so we kept going back to it being a new Riff on Ken's life. And then we started thinking about product that we envisioned making and that we were planning to make, and that it was based in tradition. It was based on the sour mash regimen, which is what we consider the Kentucky regimen. It's how whiskey is made here in Kentucky. So we were honoring that, but our plans were to innovate and to create something new and something special and something a little different. And so we started talking about, hey, wait a second, we're a new Riff on an old tradition.
Right.
Right. New Riff. So it just sort of fell into place in a nice way and felt real and felt authentic. And then with the bottle, when we had decided on the name, we wanted to have a bottle that was a nod to traditional, right? You have
Yeah,
one.
hold on, let me grab it.
I have one right here.
So people can see it if
So
they're
people
watching.
can
Oh, yeah.
see.
I have the
Yeah.
rye. I have the
Well,
rye.
The shape of the bottle is actually a relatively known bottle shape. You might have
Uh-huh.
seen it in the market. There are a number of important brands, whiskey brands that do use this bottle shape. We modernized it, or we put our riff on it or our spin on it by this ombre, which really hadn't been done before in the industry. So we
Uh-huh.
think that that was really neat. You know, there were lots of evolutions. At first, the ombre was on the bottom and it graduated to the top, and then we switched it. And, you know, we had a lot of fun designing this bottle, but it was a risk. You know, we took a risk with this sort of modern take on a traditional bottle. Now you see it a little bit more in the industry, but at the
Right.
time, it was really one of the first.
And the recipe. How many different trial and errors did you have, or did you just come up with it in the first iteration?
So it's an interesting story in and of itself. So, you know, Ken had not been in the distilling business. None of us had, right? We consider ourselves almost like corporate refugees is a term we used early on for a lot of our employees here at New Riff. And so our master distiller, Brian Sprance, actually, and people find this hard to believe, but he had actually never distilled a thing in his life when we hired him. So
Wait,
this
wait, I have
really
to stop you there. So he answered an ad for a master distiller. No, without any
not
kind of,
exactly, but
not exactly. You
no, he
obviously
had
had great trust in him,
well, he had experience. He had worked for Sam Adams for over 15 years. So he was a master fermenter.
which, by the
Um,
way, everyone, Sam Adams is in Kentucky. It is not in Boston. No,
Absolutely, it
yeah,
is, and it's big industry here, and it's
yeah.
important. And so Brian worked there. He was a master fermenter. I mean,
Okay.
a title doesn't really exist, but he really knew fermentation backwards and forwards. And so the vision that Ken felt very strongly about was, I don't want to hire an assistant master distiller from Maker's Mark or from Woodford,
Mm,
you know, or bring them up here and have Maker's North or Woodford North. You know, I want to have something unique and something representative of Northern Kentucky. And so that was why strategically we went out and found Brian,
uh-huh.
because he had the base down. I mean, being an expert, you have to keep everything so clean. I mean, fermentation is really, really, really a skill to master. And then we had a clean slate. You know, he
Yeah.
was interested, he was excited, and, you know, he dug right in. We did have a consulting master distiller who really took Brian under his wing and trained Brian and help us put together our distillery down to what fermenters to build and what pipes to put in. His name was Larry Ebersole,
Uh-huh.
and folks might have heard of him. He is a world renowned master distiller that had worked for Seagram's, the former Seagram's plant, for over 30 years. And rye was really his area of expertise. That's where he particularly shined. So we were his first consulting project, and he came in, and Brian likes to say that Larry taught him everything he knows about distillation.
Yeah, see, it's a new riff on his career as well. First
New riff on a lot of things.
fermenter, master fermenter to master distiller.
Well, in the industry, and you've probably heard this too, when we first started, there was sort of a word on the street that the fermentation wasn't as important, you know, that the distiller's beer wasn't super important. And we approached it from a very different angle where from the get-go we said this is extremely important. We need to have absolute best
Right.
distiller's beer we could possibly make to be the foundation of our whiskey. And so, Brian, no one better to bring in than someone who really knew fermentation.
Absolutely. And so, about how long did it take from, starting it to your liquid, or having the right recipe and having,
Yeah. Well, so
something to.
we were committed to doing things what we call the right way.
Uh-huh.
And that's our interpretation. But our interpretation was to be as transparent as possible, right? Which was also more rare at the time. Now you're seeing things like mash bills put on bottles and things like that. But that wasn't the case when we first started. So when we first came out of the gate, we said, okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait at least 4 years until our whiskey tells us that it's ready. It sounds silly, but really that was what we were saying back then. We want to release it at 4 years, but if it's not ready, we'll wait. That was the
Hmm.
commitment to the quality. And we also wanted our entry level spirit to be bottled in bond.
Right.
which you're seeing a lot more of in the industry now. There's been a resurgence in bottled and bond products, but we were one of the first to actually make our, and I think we were the first distillery that I know of to make our first entry level product also bottled and bond. So to be bottled and bond, it has to be at least 4 years old. It
Right.
has to be 100 proof, come from the same season, followed by the same distilling team its entire life. So we were that committed to quality. In fact, we embossed it on the bottle, single
Yes, I
barrel.
know. I see that.
But yeah,
Here.
bottled and bond,
Yeah,
we've
here it is on the
embossed
rye
on
as
our
well.
rye. We're both showing
Oh,
rye
yeah.
and bourbon. So we didn't release anything until 2018. So we hurried up, we distilled, and then we waited.
Now you kind of let it slip. Were you making any gin or anything else
We
while you
did.
were waiting?
We also, one of the things that we said was we were only going to make things that we like to drink. So gin was something that we made right out of the gate. We love gin. We still make it. We do what we call a Kentucky Wild gin, and then we also make a bourbon barrel aged gin, which is really exciting and fun. We sold a little bit of that along the way. We did some contract distilling for some larger clients to keep the lights on, and we waited
Uh-huh.
until 2018, and then we released bourbon and rye here in the Kentucky market, and it was worth the wait. I'm so glad we did.
It must have been so exciting.
It was such an exciting time. It's like creating anything, right? It's
Right.
it's almost can be across the board in any industry. When you're releasing a product to the world for the first time, you don't know what folks are going to say. You don't know how people are going to respond. It's a very nerve-wracking moment. The one thing we were sure about was we knew what was in the bottle was good. We knew the flavor was there. We priced things fairly. We priced our bottles, not what the market could have born at that time. But that was Ken's retailer background. He wanted it to be fair. We wanted the whiskey to be your favorite thing to drink on a Tuesday night and also what you wanted to drink on Saturday too.
Hmm.
But Gary, it's unnerving. You never know what folks are going to say. And luckily the response was wonderful.
Hmm.
So we've been riding the wave ever since. I have to pinch myself sometimes that it's only been 12 years because we've come a long way.
Now, right off the bat, were you thinking, okay, I know we're going to do bourbon first, and then we're going to have a rye and maybe a single malt later, or were these ideas kind of after you wanted to see how the bourbon went?
So, well, our bourbon is a high rye bourbon, right? So the
Mhm.
mash bill, that's something else we do. We put it on the back of the bottle. The mash bill is always
Yes, we didn't talk about that, did
on
we?
the
Yeah.
back, right? And so our bourbon is 65% corn, 30% rye, which is pretty high when you
Yeah.
think of, rye percentages, and 5% malted barley. And so out of the gate, we knew we were going to make a rye. Larry, from his former Seagram's years, had shared what we sometimes refer to as the bullet bourbon, the bullet rye recipe, sorry,
Uh-huh.
at 95 rye, 5% malted barley.
Uh-huh.
And so we made that out of the gate too, but we put a riff on it. We put our spin on it. We made 95% rye, 5% malted rye. So that was a product we made out of the gate. And we also made a little bit of 100% malted rye pretty early on too. Brian asked Larry his favorite thing that he ever made at Seagram's, and Larry said, "I made this thing. I made this mash bill one time. And it was so good, but the higher ups wouldn't let me make it because it was too expensive, so I never made it again." And Brian said, "Well, what was it?" And he said, "Well, it was this 100% malted rye, which is still a very unusual mash bill." And so we started making that early on too.
So
So
what
one of
is
the
that
things.
like?
Oh, it's so good. It's so
Uh-huh.
good,
Do you
Susan.
still
I'll have to
make
get
it?
you a bottle. We do. It's part of our core line. It's not everywhere like our bourbon and rye. I mean, none of our products are everywhere, but
Right.
it's not as easy to find, but it is exceptional. And we learned a lot too. We expected it to be just like a rye on steroids,
Right.
very bold and spicy. And it's not. When you malt the grain, it actually gives a softer, more elegant flavor. And so it's a real fun whiskey to try. I would love anyone listening to try to pick up a bottle if you can find one. It's hard to know where to put it on the shelf. I think
Uh-huh.
that's the issue because it doesn't, calling it a malt whiskey doesn't really do it justice, right? And it's not really a rye because the flavors are so different because of the malting. So it's kind of this unknown category. But it's just another nod to our innovation and experimenting. You know, Ken, one of the things that he was really good at was getting out of people's way and saying, Brian, you know, I trust your palate. I trust what you're learning. Like, let's make some great whiskey.
Yeah.
And you mentioned our single
Yes.
malt program, which we just disclosed to the public 3 years ago now. But it was something that we started producing early on as well. Actually, you know, there was a love for Scotch whiskey and a love for international whiskeys here from the get go. You know, Brian and some of his teammates traveled to Scotland to learn about how Scotch was made and single malt, particularly. And so came back and started dabbling a little bit. It's still about 2% of our overall production. It's pretty small, but it is delicious.
Hmm.
And the commitment to quality and the commitment to what ends up going into the bottle. I mean, there's so much work. It's so much tasting there. It's pretty special.
How old? How old is it? Is also for the 4 years, or is it older?
No, so we released our first single malt at 7 years.
7.
So it's aged at least 7 years. And we've released a new offering of it every year. So we make just a little bit, and then the following year we'll make a little bit, but it's 7 years older generally. And it's, you know, it's 100% malted barley. It's our nod to Scotland.
And so I know also that people can come and visit you.
Yeah. Northern Kentucky is the most underrated place to visit in Kentucky, and it shouldn't be that way. It's such a great place to visit. I will say we planted our roots here, and then now we actually have 9 distilleries in the Northern Kentucky area. So there's been a lot of growth, and because of that growth, we have some amazing restaurants. We have some amazing bars, giant bourbon and whiskey selections. We actually also have the international airport. We have CVG, Cincinnati Airport, but it's in Kentucky, about 20 minutes from here. And we have a direct flight to London every day on British Airways from this airport. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes, it wasn't around when I came. We flew through I forget where we flew through somewhere to get there. And
yeah.
yes, I can vouch. I love Covington and I love Newport. I think they're great. But I meant they can actually visit your distillery and have a drink there.
Oh, well, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Everyone should come. They should come on the international flight or drive in. And we do. We have a tasting room bar on our third floor of our distillery. We're very proud of. We renovated it about 2 years ago, and we call it the Aquifer. So one of the things about New Riff that's really special, sometimes we refer to it as our secret weapon, is that the entire distillery is run on an alluvial aquifer that runs right underground, right under the distillery. So it's
Now,
very, very hard water, very mineral rich
uh-huh.
water. Calcium, calcium, what's in limestone? Calcium, right? It's limestone, calcium rich water. And it fuels everything we do here at the distillery. So we named our tasting room after it. So come visit us at the Aquifer. You can have world-class cocktails, beer, wine, and most importantly, you can try over everything we've ever made. We have a pour of. We've held back bottles, so you can try all of our Whiskey Club offerings as well as our core stuff.
Now, did Ken know when he was building the party source that there was an aquifer below it, or
No,
it just happened?
he didn't know. He didn't know. It'd be a great story if he did. We didn't even know it when we were building the foundation for this
I
building, in all
I think it's a
transparency.
better story that you don't know, that you
Oh,
didn't know.
good.
It just
Well, that's the
happened.
truth.
Right. It just
That
happened and it was
it
meant to
happened. You know, the
be.
plan
How did you
was to
find it?
use municipal city
Uh-huh.
water, right? Which, you know, Newport water, it's not the best. I'll tell you, it's certainly not the best in Kentucky. It's fine. It's filtered. It's not that, you know, it's kind of empty water. It's water you drink, right?
Right.
But when the foundation was being laid and the plans were being built for the distillery, we realized 100 feet underground was this alluvial aquifer, which is really amazing. You know, you think about serendipity and those kinds of things. It's hard not to believe in them when a well is running right under our distillery. But we test it all the time. We test it year after year to make sure it's good quality, and it hasn't changed. It stays the same temperature all year long. It provides a tremendous green energy savings for us, and it's great water for our whiskey.
It was meant to be.
It was kismet. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. And one last thing that I wanted to ask you was, as an artist that you are, hopefully you get fulfillment from creating something that can fulfill the need. It may not be visual, but definitely it's definitely pleasing people. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. There's so many interests. There's so many things to do in life, right? And I think it's really fun to draw parallels and have the opportunity to experiment. I don't make art anymore. I'm a little bit of an all or nothing kind of person. So I don't paint anymore. At least I don't right now. But I definitely believe that whiskey is an art. I really believe that. I think that what Brian and his team do is artistic every day. It's a little bit of magic, a little bit of science, and a little bit of art all mixed together. And that is so exciting. And creating something and delivering it to the public, and I get to talk about it every day. I mean, I love what we do. So I don't miss painting because I get to be creative in other ways. We have this beautiful architectural building here. It was really fun being involved in the team to design the tasting room. So I certainly have my creative outlet that I'm able to use. And, it all makes us who we are, right? I wouldn't be the same person that I am if I didn't go to art school and didn't
Right, of
have that
course.
ability, right? Um, so no, I think that was a great question.
Thank you. And how lovely it is that you are, the next generation to take over. I assume that's the goal, is to keep it a family business.
It is the goal to keep a family business wholeheartedly. My father retired 2 years ago. We have an unbelievable leadership team. Like a lot of startups, he kind of wore a bunch of hats. We all wore lots of hats in the early days. Um, and as we've grown and as we've grown our business, we have 62 full-time employees and over 90 part-time when you include like bottling staff and whatnot. So we've grown tremendously. We've taken Ken's responsibilities and we've divided them into a couple of different people. So I'm proud to be the president of the company. We have another female CEO. Her name is Hannah. I might have mentioned her to you before. We have a lot of women in leadership here. And that's always something that I love to talk about because, you know, it's an upward battle here in the bourbon industry. It's changing. There are a lot more women in the industry than even 10 years ago when I first came and got involved. But we particularly have a lot of women on staff. And, that wasn't intentional, I'll be honest. We put the right people in the right seats, our director of hospitality, our chief sales officer, and we looked around and we said, oh my gosh, 2/3 of this company is female. This is amazing. And so that's something that we're proud of too.
Fantastic. Not only liquid, but a lot of other things too. So, what is the future? Are you going to be making something like a big splash with something new? Are you going to continue doing what you do? What's a little bit of the future?
The industry, as we all know, probably everybody listening to this podcast, the landscape's changing dramatically right now. Our main goal is to remain independent. It's harder and harder to do that.
Mhm.
To be family owned and independent is capital intensive, and so we're holding on tight. That's our goal. We believe that makes our whiskey taste better. So I wouldn't say that we have a lot of growth plans. We do plan to expand more within Europe and internationally. That's certainly not been our focus for the first 10 years. So now that's something on our horizon as the category of American whiskey is growing internationally. Um, we're also trying to figure out when what the apex of our aging is, right?
Uh-huh.
So as a young distillery, we last year we released an 8-year-old bourbon. That's part of our core offerings at this point. And we have in our whiskey club released some 10-year-old whiskey, but we still don't know how far our whiskey's going to go. We think it's delicious now and still really vivacious and young. So we're going to taste it at 12 years. We're going to taste it at 15. That's going to be an exciting point on the horizon when we feel like we've hit its best point. So that we still don't know when it will be yet. But just to continue really focusing on the culture here internally and makes people feel taken care of and seen and heard and continue to want to come to work here every day to work in a great.
Well, it sounds like it is, and they get a great thing to drink too when they at the end of the day.
Certainly, folks go home
Yeah.
every quarter with some bottles. That's some of the perks of the job.
And everyone out there in the UK, you definitely can get it here, which is exciting. So
Yes. I would be remiss not to point out that the Whiskey Exchange voted our bourbon, our bottled and bond bourbon, as the whiskey of the year this year for 2025 too. I had to put a
yes,
plug in there.
yes, congratulations on that.
That's a big
That's
deal.
really
Thank
great, and they will find links to it on at the Whiskey Exchange and then everywhere else, and to your website. And thank you so much for going through the history again and having a chat here on Lush Life today.
A real pleasure. Please come back. Come see us, Susan, here in Newport again. And I hope to be able to come over and enjoy a dram with you in London at some point soon.
Yes, definitely. We can't wait to have you here. So thanks again.